The blood-red sun hung low over the Montana horizon as Rosalie Greene staggered through the muddy main street of Silver Creek, her swollen eye nearly shut, and her split lip trembling with each labored breath. It was 1878, and to the townsfolk who watched from porches and storefront windows, it was just another day of Thaddeus Bolton's temper getting the better of his wife. Rosalie kept her gaze fixed on the ground, her once fine blue dress now torn and soiled from where she'd fallen when Thaddeus had pushed her out of their home above the general store. 6 years of marriage had taught her that looking anyone in the eye only made things worse later. The whispers would follow, and whispers always made it back to Thaddeus. "Poor thing," someone murmured, not quite softly enough. "She ought to know better than to rile him by now," another responded. Rosalie quickened her pace, seeking the sanctuary of the livery stable where she sometimes hid when Thaddeus was in his cups. The stable owner's wife had been kind to her once or twice, offering a cup of tea and a quiet corner until Thaddeus inevitably came looking for her with flowers and promises that dissolved like morning mist. She was so focused on reaching the stable that she didn't notice the lone rider entering town until his horse was nearly upon her. The animal's snort made her jump back, nearly losing her balance in the mud. "Beg your pardon, madam." The rider's deep voice came from above. "Didn't mean to startle you." Rosalie looked up, squinting through her good eye. The man atop the dappled gray stallion was a stranger tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair curled beneath a well-worn hat, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "No harm done," she mumbled, stepping aside to let him pass. But the stranger didn't move on. Instead, he dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, laugh lines, not the angry creases that marked Thaddeus's face. "You're hurt," he said, his voice gentle as he took in her battered appearance. Rosalie shrank back. "It's nothing. Nothing doesn't usually leave a mark like that." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a clean handkerchief. "Here." She hesitated before accepting it, pressing the soft cloth to her bleeding lip. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett O'Malley," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Just passing through." "Rosalie Greene," she replied, then tensed as she spotted Thaddeus emerging from the general store, his face thunderous as he caught sight of her talking to a stranger. "Rose," Thaddeus bellowed. "Get back here this instant." Garrett O'Malley turned toward the approaching man, his posture shifting subtly. "Friend of yours." "My husband," Rosalie whispered, handing back the handkerchief with trembling fingers. Thaddeus reached them, his breath reeking of whiskey as he grabbed Rosalie's arm. "Apologize to this gentleman for bothering him, Rose." "She wasn't bothering me," Garrett said evenly. "Wasn't talking to you, stranger." Thaddeus tightened his grip, making Rosalie wince. "My wife knows better than to speak to men she doesn't know." Garrett's eyes narrowed slightly. "Seems to me a lady with injuries like that might need a doctor more than a lecture." The crowd that had begun to gather went quiet. No one interfered in Thaddeus Bolton's business, especially not when it concerned his wife. "Seems to me you should mind your own damn business," Thaddeus snarled. "We don't need drifters telling us how to live in Silver Creek." Garrett didn't back down. "I found that men who hurt women aren't particular about who they're willing to fight." Thaddeus released Rosalie with a shove, sending her stumbling backward. "You looking for trouble, cowboy?" "No, sir." Garrett's voice remained calm. "Just making an observation." For a tense moment, it seemed Thaddeus might throw a punch, but Sheriff Wilson's voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Bolton. Go sleep it off." Thaddeus spat on the ground between Garrett's boots. "This ain't over." He turned to Rosalie. "Get inside. Now." Rosalie cast one last glance at Garrett O'Malley before following her husband back toward the general store, her shoulders hunched in defeat. Garrett watched them go, his expression unreadable. He'd seen such scenes before in his travels across the West, women trapped in marriages that were little more than prisons. He'd learned long ago that interfering usually made things worse for the woman. But something about Rosalie Greene's quiet dignity struck him. She hadn't begged for help or made excuses for her husband. She'd simply accepted her fate with a resignation that spoke of years of broken hope. "You'd best move along," Sheriff Wilson said, approaching him. "Bolton's got a nasty temper, especially where his wife is concerned." "Is that so?" Garrett replied, swinging back into his saddle. "And the law in these parts doesn't have anything to say about a man beating his wife?" The sheriff's weathered face hardened. "What happens between a man and his wife is their business, not the law's. Unless you're planning to settle here, I suggest you keep riding." Garrett tipped his hat. "I'd planned to stay a few days, looking for ranch work." "Try the O'Hara place, 3 miles west," the sheriff said grudgingly. "They're always short-handed. Just stay clear of Bolton and his wife." Garrett nodded and urged his horse forward, but his mind remained on the woman with the wounded eyes and quiet strength. At the O'Hara ranch, Garrett found work easily enough. The foreman was short 2 hands after a cattle drive to Cheyenne, and Garrett's experience breaking horses made him a valuable addition. He worked hard during the day, returning to Silver Creek in the evenings to take a room at the Frontier Hotel. It was 3 days before he saw Rosalie again. He was leaving the general store when he spotted her arranging fabric bolts in the window display. The bruise around her eye had faded to a sickly yellow, but a fresh mark bloomed on her cheek. He tipped his hat as he passed the window. To his surprise, she offered a small, tentative smile in return, quickly glancing around as if to ensure no one had seen the exchange. That evening, Garrett sat at the back of the Silver Spur Saloon, nursing a whiskey when the piano player began a lively tune. The saloon girls swirled around the room, encouraging men to buy drinks and dance. He declined several invitations, content to observe the townspeople. Sheriff Wilson entered, followed by several prominent citizens including the mayor and the banker. They took a table near Garrett's, seemingly unaware of his presence as they ordered drinks. "Bolton's at it again," the banker said quietly. "Saw Mrs. Bolton at Sunday service with her collar buttoned all the way up in this heat. Could still see the marks on her neck." The mayor shook his head. "It's a shame, but what can be done? A man's home is his castle. Someone ought to teach Bolton a lesson," another man grumbled. "Like who?" the sheriff retorted. "You, Doc? Or perhaps you, Mayor? Bolton may be a mean drunk, but he's the only store owner willing to extend credit when times are hard. Half the town owes him." The conversation shifted to cattle prices, but Garrett had heard enough. The town's complicity in Rosalie's suffering was as much to blame as Thaddeus Bolton's fists. The next morning, Garrett rode into town earlier than usual. He tied his horse outside the general store and entered just as Rosalie was sweeping the floor. She looked up, startled by the jingling bell above the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Bolton," he said formally, aware they weren't alone. Thaddeus was behind the counter, eyeing him suspiciously. "Help you with something?" Thaddeus asked coldly. "Need some supplies," Garrett replied, placing his list on the counter. "Working at the O'Hara place." Thaddeus relaxed slightly at the mention of employment. "O'Hara's a good customer. I'll have these ready in a moment." He moved to the back of the store to gather the items. Garrett glanced at Rosalie, who had resumed sweeping, her movements careful and measured as if each one caused pain. "Nice day," he said quietly. She nodded without looking up. "It is. Shame to spend it all indoors. Some of us don't have a choice," she murmured. then tensed as Thaddeus returned with Garrett's supplies. "That'll be $2.40, Thaddeus said, watching as Garrett counted out the money. "Worth every penny," Garrett replied, gathering his purchases. "Good day to you both." As he left, he felt Rosalie's eyes on his back but didn't turn around. It wouldn't do either of them any good for Thaddeus to suspect an attachment. Over the next 2 weeks, Garrett became a familiar sight in Silver Creek. He attended church services, participated in a town social, and even helped organize a barn raising for a family whose property had been damaged in a storm. Through it all, he watched Rosalie from a distance, their interactions limited to polite nods and occasional words when he visited the store. What he saw troubled him deeply. Thaddeus's control over Rosalie extended beyond physical abuse. He monitored her conversations, controlled what she wore, and seemed to delight in humiliating her publicly with cutting remarks disguised as humor. "My Rose here couldn't find her way out of a one-room cabin without directions," Thaddeus would say with a laugh at social gatherings, his hand gripping her arm tight enough to leave marks. The townsfolk would chuckle uncomfortably, looking away from Rosalie's downcast eyes. It was easier to laugh than to acknowledge the cruelty. Garrett wasn't the only one watching. He noticed Mrs. Abernathy, the midwife, slipping Rosalie herbs when Thaddeus wasn't looking. He saw how the blacksmith's wife would engage Thaddeus in conversation, giving Rosalie brief moments of respite. Small kindnesses in a town that had collectively decided to look the other way. It was at the Founders' Day picnic that everything changed. The entire town had gathered at the meadow by the creek, with tables laden with food and children running wild with joy. Rosalie moved among the crowd serving lemonade, her face composed despite the long sleeves she wore in the summer heat to hide the marks on her arms. Garrett was helping with the horseshoe competition when he heard raised voices. Thaddeus had Rosalie by the wrist, berating her for spilling lemonade on a customer. "Clumsy as a newborn calf," Thaddeus sneered, yanking her away from the crowd. "Can't even pour a drink without making a mess." Garrett placed the horseshoes down and moved toward them, but before he could intervene, Thaddeus had dragged Rosalie behind the supply wagon where they couldn't be seen. The sound of a slap echoed, followed by a muffled cry. Without thinking, Garrett rounded the wagon. Thaddeus had Rosalie pinned against the wheel, his hand raised for another blow. "That's enough," Garrett said, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. Thaddeus turned, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment at being caught. "This doesn't concern you, O'Malley. I'm making it my concern." Garrett stepped closer. "Take your hands off her." "Or what?" Thaddeus challenged, still gripping Rosalie's arm. "You going to fight me over my own wife?" "If I have to." Thaddeus laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You hear that, Rose? The cowboy thinks he's your knight in shining armor." He shoved Rosalie aside and squared up to Garrett. "Let's see what you're made of, then." Garrett dodged the first wild swing easily. He'd been in enough fights to know that Thaddeus's anger made him sloppy. He blocked a second punch and landed one of his own, catching Thaddeus in the jaw and sending him stumbling backward. "Stop it," Rosalie cried. "Please, just stop." But Thaddeus was beyond reason now. He charged at Garrett like a bull, managing to tackle him to the ground. They rolled in the dirt, trading blows until Sheriff Wilson and several other men pulled them apart. "What in God's name is going on here?" the sheriff demanded. "This drifter attacked me," Thaddeus spat, blood trickling from his split lip. "Tried to interfere between me and my wife. Is that true, O'Malley?" Sheriff Wilson asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Garrett wiped blood from his own face. "I saw a man about to beat a woman and stepped in. If that's a crime in Silver Creek, then lock me up." The sheriff looked between the two men, then at Rosalie, who stood trembling with her arms wrapped around herself. Mrs. Bolton, go back to the picnic. Your husband and Mr. O'Malley are going to cool off in jail for the night. Sheriff Rosalie began, but Thaddeus cut her off. Do as you're told, Rose. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes meeting Garrett's. In that brief exchange, something passed between them, an understanding, a promise. Then she turned and walked away, her back straight despite everything. In the small jail, Garrett and Thaddeus were placed in separate cells. Thaddeus alternated between threats and drunken sleep as the hours passed. Sheriff Wilson sat at his desk, occasionally glancing up from his paperwork. You're making things worse for her, you know? The sheriff said quietly after Thaddeus had finally passed out. Bolton won't forget this humiliation. Garrett leaned against the bars. And what would you suggest? That everyone continue to pretend they don't see what's happening. The sheriff set down his pen with a sigh. It's not that simple. It is that simple. A man is hurting his wife, and this town is letting it happen. The law be damned. Garrett interrupted. There's right and there's wrong, and what's happening to Rosalie Bolton is wrong. Sheriff Wilson studied him for a long moment. You care for her. It wasn't a question, and Garrett didn't treat it as one. I do. That's a dangerous road, O'Malley. Even if Bolton were out of the picture, this town has a long memory. A woman who leaves her husband, for any reason, carries that shame forever. Maybe it's time Silver Creek learned some new ways. The sheriff shook his head. You're either a fool or the bravest man I've met. Possibly both. Morning came, and with it Rosalie herself. She entered the jail carrying a basket covered with a cloth. Her face was composed, though a fresh bruise darkened her temple. Mrs. Bolton, Sheriff Wilson greeted her. What can I do for you? I've brought breakfast for the prisoners, she said quietly. If that's permitted. The sheriff nodded. Of course. Thaddeus was still sleeping off his hangover, so Rosalie approached Garrett's cell first. She handed him a napkin-wrapped biscuit through the bars. Thank you, he said softly. No, she whispered, her eyes meeting his. Thank you. No one has ever stood up for me before. Before he could respond, Thaddeus stirred. Rosalie quickly moved to his cell, her posture changing instantly, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered. What are you doing here? Thaddeus growled. I brought food, she replied, and clean clothes. He snatched the offering from her hands. Did you mind the store yesterday after I was locked up? Yes, Thaddeus. Everything is fine. Good. He glared at Garrett. We'll deal with him later. Sheriff Wilson cleared his throat. Actually, both of you are free to go. I expect there won't be any more trouble. Thaddeus smirked. No trouble for me, Sheriff, as long as certain people remember their place. As they left the jail, Garrett caught Rosalie's eye one last time. There was something different there now, a spark of something that hadn't been present before. Something like hope. 2 days later, Garrett was chopping wood behind the bunkhouse when one of the younger ranch hands came running up. Mr. O'Malley, there's a lady asking for you at the main house. Garrett wiped his brow, his heart quickening. Did she give a name? Mrs. Bolton, sir. She seems mighty upset. Garrett found Rosalie on the porch of the main house, clutching a small bundle wrapped in a shawl. Her face was pale, and fresh bruises marked her neck and wrists. Rosalie, he said, approaching slowly. What happened? He said he'd kill me this time, she whispered. He found your handkerchief in my dress pocket. The one you gave me that first day. Garrett's stomach clenched. Are you hurt badly? She shook her head. I ran before he could do worse. I didn't know where else to go. You did right coming here. He gently touched her arm. Mrs. O'Hara will help you get cleaned up. Then we'll figure out what to do. Mrs. O'Hara, a kind-hearted woman who had lost her own daughter to a fever years before, took Rosalie under her wing immediately. She tended to her injuries, provided fresh clothes, and insisted she stay for dinner. Over the meal, Garrett explained the situation to Mr. O'Hara, who listened with a grave expression. "Bolton's a mean one," the rancher said, "but he's got influence in town. The bank holds his notes, and half the businesses depend on his store." "I can't go back," Rosalie said quietly. "Not this time. No one's asking you to," Garrett assured her. "But where can I go?" she asked. "I have no family, no money of my own." Mr. O'Hara exchanged a look with his wife. "You can stay here as long as you need, Mrs. Bolton. We have plenty of room." "Thaddeus will come looking for me," Rosalie warned. "Let him," Mrs. O'Hara said firmly. "This is our property. He has no rights here." That night, after Rosalie had been settled in a guest room, Garrett sat on the porch with Mr. O'Hara, discussing their options. "Bolton won't let her go easily," the rancher warned. "A man like that sees his wife as property." "I know," Garrett replied, "but I won't let him hurt her again." Mr. O'Hara studied him. "You've developed feelings for her." Garrett didn't deny it. "She deserves better than what life has given her so far." "That she does," the older man agreed. "But are you prepared for what's coming? The town will take Bolton's side. They always do." "Then they're wrong," Garrett said simply. True to prediction, Thaddeus Bolton arrived at the O'Hara Ranch the following afternoon, accompanied by Sheriff Wilson. They found Garrett and Mr. O'Hara waiting for them on the porch. "I've come for my wife," Thaddeus announced without preamble. "Mrs. Bolton is resting," Mr. O'Hara replied, "and she's not receiving visitors." "She's not a visitor, she's my wife," Thaddeus snarled. "I have the right to take her home." Sheriff Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. O'Hara, I understand your concern, but legally speaking, Mr. Bolton is correct. A husband has authority over his wife." "Not when he beats her nearly to death," Garrett said, stepping forward. "Not when he threatens to kill her." "Those are serious allegations," the sheriff replied. "But without Mrs. Bolton's testimony, I'll testify." All heads turned to see Rosalie standing in the doorway. Despite her bruises, she held herself with newfound dignity. "Rose," Thaddeus said, his voice suddenly gentle, "you're confused. Come home, and we'll forget this ever happened." "No, Thaddeus," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not confused. For the first time in years, I'm seeing clearly." "You're my wife," he growled, dropping the pretense of kindness. "You took vows before God." "Vows that said nothing about enduring beatings," she countered, "or living in fear." Thaddeus turned to the sheriff. "Are you going to enforce the law or not?" Sheriff Wilson removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Mrs. Bolton, do you wish to file charges against your husband for assault?" Rosalie straightened her shoulders. "I do." "This is ridiculous," Thaddeus exploded. "You can't possibly take her word over mine. I'm a respected businessman. A respected businessman who came home drunk and did this to his wife," Garrett said, gesturing to Rosalie's bruised face. "Mr. O'Hara and his wife have both documented her injuries. Doc Miller can confirm they're consistent with a beating, not an accident." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Mr. Bolton, I'm going to have to ask you to come back to town with me. We need to sort this out properly." "You'll regret this," Thaddeus hissed at Rosalie. "All of you will." As they rode away, Rosalie's composure finally broke. She sank onto a porch chair, her whole body trembling. "He'll never let me go," she whispered. Garrett knelt beside her. "You don't have to face this alone anymore." She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Why are you helping me? You barely know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're brave and kind, despite everything you've endured. I know you deserve a chance at happiness. The town will never accept this," she warned. "They'll say I abandoned my husband, that I'm improper." "Let them talk," Garrett replied. "Words can't hurt you as much as staying with him would." In the weeks that followed, Silver Creek buzzed with gossip. Thaddeus Bolton was released after paying a fine, but the public nature of the charges had damaged his reputation. Several women came forward with stories of how he had mistreated them or their daughters when they worked in his store, emboldened by Rosalie's stand. Rosalie stayed at the O'Hara Ranch, helping Mrs. O'Hara with household duties while she considered her options. Garrett continued his work as a ranch hand, but now he had a purpose beyond the next paycheck. Each evening, he and Rosalie would sit on the porch, talking as the sun set over the mountains. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about the father who had arranged her marriage to Thaddeus when she was barely 18, seeing it as a chance for his daughter to have a secure future in the growing West. She spoke of her early hopes for happiness, and how they had withered under Thaddeus's increasingly controlling and violent behavior. Garrett shared his own story, the loss of his parents to fever when he was 16, his years working cattle drives and breaking horses across the territories, his dream of someday having land of his own. "Why Silver Creek?" she asked one evening. "Of all the places you could have stopped, why here?" Garrett smiled. "My horse threw a shoe. I was only planning to stay long enough for the blacksmith to fix it. And now I have a reason to stay," he said, meeting her eyes. Their first kiss came naturally, a gentle meeting of lips beneath a canopy of stars. Rosalie pulled back, touching her fingers to her mouth in wonder. "I never knew it could be like that," she whispered. "Gentle." Garrett took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Everything between us will always be gentle, Rosalie. That's a promise." Word of their growing relationship spread through town like wildfire. Some, particularly the older, more traditional families, were scandalized. A woman seeking to leave her husband was bad enough, but to take up with another man while still married was beyond the pale. Others, however, particularly those who had witnessed Thaddeus's cruelty over the years, quietly supported Rosalie. Mrs. Abernathy brought preserves to the ranch. The blacksmith's wife organized a sewing circle that included Rosalie. Small gestures of solidarity in a town divided. Thaddeus, meanwhile, had begun drinking more heavily. The general store's hours became erratic, and suppliers reported unpaid bills. His threats against Rosalie and Garrett were common knowledge, but most dismissed them as the ramblings of a drunk. It was Pastor Reynolds who finally approached Rosalie after Sunday service, suggesting a solution that had seemed impossible. "Divorce is not something I recommend lightly, Mrs. Bolton," the elderly pastor said. "But there are provisions in territorial law for cases of extreme cruelty. With witnesses willing to testify to your husband's treatment of you, it might be possible." "I never thought," Rosalie began, hardly daring to hope. "It would not be easy," the pastor cautioned. "The proceedings would be public. People would talk." "People already talk," Garrett pointed out. "Indeed they do," Pastor Reynolds agreed with a small smile. "But I find myself wondering if perhaps it's time Silver Creek learned that God's love extends even to those who must make difficult choices." The divorce proceedings were as difficult as predicted. Thaddeus fought viciously, accusing Rosalie of infidelity and claiming she had provoked any violence through her own failings as a wife. But testimony from Dr. Miller about treating Rosalie's injuries over the years, combined with statements from women who had witnessed Thaddeus's abuse, swayed the territorial judge. When the final decree was granted, Rosalie wept not from sorrow, but from a profound sense of liberation. For the first time in her adult life, she was free to make her own choices. That freedom came with consequences. Thaddeus was forced to sell the general store to pay his debts, leaving town shortly thereafter for parts unknown. Some in Silver Creek blamed Rosalie for his downfall, crossing the street to avoid her when she came to town. Others, however, nodded in greeting or stopped to pass the time of day. Mrs. Abernathy hired Rosalie to help in her medical practice, valuing her gentle manner with patience and quick mind for remembering treatments. Through it all, Garrett remained steadfast. His proposal came on a crisp autumn evening as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name. "I'm not a wealthy man," he told her, holding both her hands in his, "but I've saved enough to buy a small parcel of land near the O'Hara place. It's good grazing land, with a stream running through it and a stand of cottonwoods that would shade a house nicely." Rosalie's heart quickened. "It sounds beautiful." "It could be," he agreed, "with the right person to share it." He drew a deep breath. "I love you, Rosalie. I think I've loved you since that first day, when you took my handkerchief with such dignity despite everything. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. Yes, I would." Their wedding was a simple affair at the O'Hara Ranch. Pastor Reynolds officiated, his presence a quiet rebuke to those who had condemned Rosalie's choices. Mrs. O'Hara had sewn Rosalie a new dress of pale blue, and Mr. O'Hara gave her away with tears in his eyes. Not everyone approved. Several prominent families declined to attend, and whispers followed the couple as they walked through town in the days after the ceremony. "Heard the Cowboy married Bolton's leftovers," one man remarked loudly as they passed the saloon. "Guess some men aren't particular about getting damaged goods," another replied with a laugh. Rosalie tensed, but Garrett simply took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Let them talk," he murmured. "Their words can't touch what we have." As months passed into years, the whispers gradually faded. The small ranch Garrett and Rosalie established began to prosper, their careful management and hard work yielding results that even the most skeptical neighbors had to respect. They added to their herd each year, built a cozy house among the cottonwoods, and became known for breeding some of the finest horses in the territory. Rosalie's work with Mrs. Abernathy expanded her knowledge of medicine, and soon she was the person many turned to for treatment of everyday ailments and assistance with difficult births. Her gentle manner and quiet competence earned her a respect that transcended the scandal of her past. In their third year of marriage, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Hannah after Garrett's mother. The child had her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's gentle spirit, becoming the center of their world from the moment she drew her first breath. It was at Hannah's christening that Sheriff Wilson, now gray and contemplating retirement, approached them with an extended hand. "I owe you both an apology," he said gruffly. "I should have done more for you, Mrs. O'Malley, when you were suffering under Bolton's hand." Rosalie shifted baby Hannah in her arms. "You were bound by the laws and customs of the time, Sheriff." "Laws and customs can be wrong," he replied. "It took courage to stand against them. Courage I lacked." He glanced at Garrett. "You were right that day in the jail. There's right and there's wrong, and what was happening to her was wrong." Garrett clasped the older man's hand. "We've all learned from the past. The important thing is that we do better going forward." As their daughter grew, so did their standing in the community. Garrett was elected to the town council, where he advocated for stronger protections for women and children. Rosalie established a small school in their home for ranch children too far from town to attend regularly, her natural gift for teaching bringing out the best in even the most reluctant students. When a fire devastated the eastern part of Silver Creek in 1885, it was the O'Malley Ranch that took in displaced families, with Rosalie organizing relief efforts that saved lives and helped rebuild what was lost. Those who had once crossed the street to avoid her now sought her counsel and friendship. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the town held a celebration in their honor at the newly built community hall. Mr. O'Hara, now stooped with age but still sharp of mind, raised a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "To Garrett and Rosalie O'Malley," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "who taught us that love isn't about possession or control, but about bringing out the best in each other. Who showed us that courage isn't about physical strength, but about doing what's right even when it's difficult. And who reminded us that a community is only as strong as how it treats its most vulnerable members." As applause filled the hall, Garrett pulled Rosalie close, pressing a kiss to her temple where once a bruise had marked her skin. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "The scandal, the whispers, all we went through?" Rosalie looked up at him, at the laugh lines that had deepened around his eyes and the strands of silver now threading through his dark hair. She thought of their thriving ranch, their beautiful daughter, the life they had built together. "Not for a single moment," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him properly, heedless of the smiling onlookers. "You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I'd forgotten how to believe in myself. You didn't just save me, Garrett O'Malley. You showed me how to save myself." Around them, Silver Creek celebrated the same town that had once laughed at the cowboy who married the abused woman now honored them as leading citizens, their story a testament to what love could overcome and what courage could build from the ashes of despair. And in that moment, surrounded by the community that had finally embraced them, Rosalie knew that the greatest revenge against cruelty wasn't hatred or bitterness, but the joy of a life well lived, a truth she and Garrett had proven with every day of their shared journey.